Seawald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, how to talk to kids to build motivation, stress tolerance, and a happy home. Communication in general is hard. Communication with kids is even harder. What do you say to your kids when you want to motivate them, get them to listen and cooperate without resorting to begging, scolding, lecturing, nagging, ordering, and threatening? Today's guests have written a brand new book called What Do You Say? How to Talk to Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. It's fantastic, packed with not only valuable information, but practical tips, scripts that you can use, and super helpful Q&A sections. It's highly accessible, fun to read, and I am positive it will become a favorite of yours. My guests today are Ned Johnson and Dr. William Stixrud. Together, they co-authored The Self-Driven Child, The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives, which explores how fostering children's autonomy can solve two challenges seemingly endemic to kids today: handling anxiety and developing intrinsic motivation. I have to say, in my opinion, this is one of the best parenting books out there. And if you are a long-term listener, you may remember that I have interviewed Dr. William Stixrud on the podcast last year. Dr. Ned Johnson is an author, speaker, and founder of Prep Matters, an educational company providing academic tutoring, educational planning, and standardized test preparation. He's the host of the Prep Talks podcast, conversations with parenting and education experts, and his work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, NPR, and many others. Dr. William Stixrud is a clinical psychologist and founder of the Stixrud Group, a lifespan neuropsychology practice. He is also a member of the adjunct faculty of the Children's National Medical Center, and he holds a faculty appointment as assistant clinical professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the George Washington School of Medicine. Additionally, Dr. Stixrud is a frequent lecturer, and he has authored scientific articles on transcendental meditation and book chapters on meditation and the integration of the arts into education. Both Ned Johnson and Dr. William Stixrud practice transcendental meditation. If you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Stixrud and Ned Johnson, may I suggest a few past episodes that complement today's show. The first one I would recommend is episode 251, How to Raise a Self-Driven Child with Dr. William Stixrud. Episode 260, Parenting with Presence with Dr. Dan Siegel. Episode 278, What Kids Need Most from You. It's a solo episode. Another one is episode 238, The Secret to Getting Kids to Listen and Cooperate. This is an episode with Laura Froen. And the last one is episode 167. It's an on-air coaching episode, and it's called How to Curb Backtalk, Teach Respect and Responsibility Without Punishments. As always, links to my guests' books, website, and anything mentioned on the episode can be found in the show notes. Please enjoy this dynamic conversation with Ned Johnson and Dr. William Stixrud. Dr. William Stixrud and Ned Johnson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
I am delighted to have both of you on the call with me today. When I first had a chance to speak with Dr. Stixrud on the podcast, it was the thick of the pandemic, and I was battling with my 7th grader. I was struggling myself emotionally and psychologically because I'm in the helping profession, and it was becoming very overwhelming. And that conversation, believe it or not, changed something for me. It was this turning point in the entire pandemic that I started looking at the bright side. It gave me hope, and it was a very healing conversation. So first of all, I wanted to mention that I think that was one of the best conversations that I had last year on the podcast, that it was really helpful for me personally on a much deeper level that people might have understood, the listener.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I'm really happy to know that.
Yeah. So I'm excited to have this conversation, as your first book is one of the best books on parenting. As I mentioned last time, that's the only book I recommended my husband read, a parenting
I remember,
book. Yeah. So this second book is even better, right? Because you have so many wonderful sentences, what to say, because parents always want to know, but what do I say? What do I say? And of course, in your trademark style, you have the Q&A section and the science. It's very accessible, and I really enjoyed reading it. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm curious, did your husband take your sage advice and read our book a little bit, The Self-Driven Child?
You nailed it a little bit. Yes. Yes. It's hard to change people, right? They have their own interests. You know, they read certain things. I mean, he's an avid reader, but all I can do is non-forcefully offer, right? Mm-hmm. That's all I can do.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think it made a difference. Yes.
Good.
All jokes aside.
Yeah.
So last time in your book, you start with autonomy. This book is different. You start with empathy, closeness, and connection. Tell me why, and give me the key points from that chapter.
So what happened was that Ned and I, after the Self-Driven Child came out, Ned and I were just lecturing all over the country about it very frequently, doing a lot of podcasts, talking about it a lot, writing some additional articles. And our agent said, it's time for a second book. And he said, and he has kids himself. He says, I really write a book that just has a lot of, what do you say? How do you talk to kids? And so in thinking about it, we thought really the communicating with kids, well, let me take a step back. We started doing this at a time where the mental health problems in young people are just off the charts. And we know that the closest thing to a silvered bullet in terms of protecting kids emotionally is a warm, close relationship with their parents. And so let's start there. Let's start with the chapter on communicating with kids in a way that facilitates that close, trusting, loving, supportive relationship with parents. And it turns out that the key is really empathy. I mean, it's really that expressing empathy and validating kids' feelings, being able to handle emotionally charged situations when kids are really upset. I mean, that's the way we tend to feel close to people, if we share fairly intense emotions. And so that's why we focus on this first chapter and focus on the importance of listening in an active way, where we're letting kids know we're trying to understand them, and also validating kids' feelings. And Ned, tell about the wigging part.
Yeah, and so I'll add to that before I jump into the wigging, that the other reason we wrote this book is a lot of people who really enjoyed and took a lot of helpful advice out of The Self-Driven Child still in those moments would get a little stuck, right? And they kind of knew where they should land the conversation, but they didn't know quite what to say. And it's really stressful for you, for me, for all of us as parents to kind of know what we're trying to do, but not know how to do it, to not know kind of what's my line. I mean, show up on stage and you've forgotten your line. It's a little bit intense. And so this whole the idea of leading with empathy and validation is that a lot of times I think people think they need to get the perfect words, the perfect phrase, right, to get their kid to listen or to calm down or to solve the problem. And it turns out in many ways that it's not, there's no kind of perfect what, but a bit more of the how. Because when our children feel close to us, as Bill points out, it's so valuable as a silver bullet against stress and anxiety, but also in the moment when, if I'm upset about something and Bill says, gosh, that sounds really hard. It sounds to me like this. Is there a way that I can help? Just feeling listened to and feeling understood calms to some degree some of the hard emotions that I have, rather than jumping in to solve the problem for me. And I feel, and it really puts me in a headspace, in a brain state where I can solve more of those problems myself. And so this idea of what wigging that Bill talked about. There's a wonderful guy named Ron McGinn, who is kind of a parenting consultant and communications expert on how can we as parents and as educators talk more effectively with kids. And it's a tool of reflective listening, which is kind of the foundational skill or foundational approach of really all effective therapy. And WIGGING stands for what I got is. And so if your kid comes to you and is upset that the teacher did something unfair, or their friends weren't being nice, or they got cut from the soccer team, or whatever, that their little brother took their toy, whatever, we have this natural tendency to feel like, I got to solve this. Where kind of step one is, well, gosh, you seem really frustrated by it. So let me repeat that back. So what it sounds to me is like, you didn't get your fair share on the playground, that your brother was playing for a long time and it was your turn. And then when it was your turn, you didn't get your chance. Do I have that right? And it does two things. One, it buys us time as parents to figure out our next line, right? But it also goes a long way to have, well, that's just right. It was so unfair. And we can do this kind of multiple ways. And just the idea of feeling heard, I'm not solving anything, as Aran describes, lowers the emotional charge, which is basically quieting the amygdala, the stress response, and allows that part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that can put things into perspective to come online. And so it's so note in that situation, if as parents, if we picture ourselves there, I haven't offered a solution yet. I haven't passed judgment. I haven't done any of that. I've just repeated, gosh, that sounds really frustrating. And let me repeat that back. And it makes kids feel like we're on their side, even if we haven't taken sides, just because they feel understood.
And I'll just add quickly, Anna, that in writing the book, we interviewed dozens and dozens of adolescents. And one of the questions we asked them was, who do you feel closest to? Mm. And sometimes it was a parent, but often it was a friend or an older cousin or an uncle. And they basically, every single kid said, I feel close to somebody who listens to me without judging me and doesn't tell me what to do. And so that's listening without judging is the first chapter. The second chapter is not telling is of the consulting part and not telling what to do.
I think that's a brilliant question. I want to just highlight that question and encourage every parent to go and ask their children that question without fear. Sometimes your child may not mention you, or they may be silent, but that's a really brilliant question. It gives so much insight into how we parent, what's going on in our relationship, right, with our children.
And you might also ask, who are the people you feel closest to? Because if the kid feels like, is this a pop quiz? If I don't say mom, do I fail? Right? They might throw me and mom on the list just as a consolation prize. But it's also, if they have that cover, they may then articulate some other people whom you might not even think of. Years ago, I had a client I worked with, and I do all my work with kids really in junior and senior of high school. And this mom who herself was a therapist. And she said to me when I'd finished up this work with her son, she said, you won't understand until you have children of your own how valuable it is to have other adults around your kids whom they connect with and whom you can trust. And because we so often as parents think that we have to be the solution to everything, have all the right advice, kind of give them all the lessons. And if we know that there are all these people around them who can give these. I just interviewed Michaeline Duclef, who's wonderful about Hunt Gather Parent, who talks about alloparents, right? And kind of that all those other adults we know have our kids' best interest in, who can help shoulder some of that burden for us in raising kids.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of parents don't have to carry the burden of being the sole person for everything for their children. That's like so much burdensome. I mean, and that cliche phrase, it takes a village, it's true. And it encourages our children. I always say that it encourages children to practice relational skills, where enriching their relational repertoire. If it's only us, it's so limited. I don't want my daughter to come to me with everything, or I don't want to be the only person in her life. I want her to have access to other adults and other attachment figures, because it's important. I know the value of that from my own life. But we see a trend, unfortunately, sometimes, people keep their children away from school, they're homeschooling, and they're the only caregivers and cut away, from their families. But I love that you also encourage this notion that let's not be scared of people. A coach, a trainer, or a teacher can influence our children as well,
Mm-hmm.
Hugely.
Hugely, yeah.
And we want, and if your kid says, I feel closest to my Uncle John, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, that as we said, that's fine. But we can, our kids can feel closer to us, I think, if we know how to communicate in a skillful way. And that's kind of what the first chapter in our book is about. It's how do you try to develop that closeness where kids trust you, but when something's hard to come to you.
What are some ways parents can develop closeness? They always ask how I can connect with my child. They always want, some new ways of connecting. And what are some ways? You suggest fantastic ways in your book. I'm wondering if you can share some of those.
Certainly, one of the newer ways is playing video games with your kid. But I'll say certainly this is not new. But the way you feel close to people, you get to really know people, is spend time one-on-one with them. And I read this when my kids were in preschool, and I did that. It was a book about how do you let your kids know you really love them? How do you communicate that? And it said, you spend time with them. But ideally, you spend time alone with them. And so I scheduled with my children, the time that they're 3 or 4, I scheduled an hour a week with each kid back to back on Sundays, doing something that was kind of mutually enjoyable. And then I did that until they left for college. I said to them, there's 168 hours in a week, and I want to make sure that I have that I have 2, one with you and one with you. And I put it in my calendar. I didn't take any phone calls, and I just wanted to let them know that you're the most important things in my life. And if I can't find an hour to be with each one of you, there's something wrong with this picture.
Yeah, and I, again, I was listening to your podcast earlier, and we so often see, 2 siblings, and each is coming to mom or dad complaining, well, he did this or she did that, and as though we're going to sort of referee them out of that, and a lot of times, just as Bill said, that for kids to feel understood and to feel that connection, if it lowers their intensity, keeping well in mind that little kids are still, and even teenagers, even some of us adults, are still trying to develop our self-regulation, right? And so just to have time, we so often think about family time, right? And so 2 parents and 2 kids or whatever, and that's really important. But I think it is really hard to overstate this value of one-on-one time, and in part because, in addition to what Bill said, kids are also much more likely to let down their guard and share hard feelings in a one-on-one situation where they may not do that when other folks are around, particularly I was reading some book that talked about how the oldest child tends to feel closer to parents and trust authority more because the parents are the authority and tend to always have their best interests in mind. But if you're the second or third kid along the way, your oldest sibling is also an authority who may or may not have your best interest in mind, right? And so for those little guys, letting them have, the caboose kids have that time one-on-one, I think is super important. We also talk about, trying to find a shared interest, and oftentimes kids will want to sort of get into whatever mom and dad are already into. But Bill sort of joked about video games, and the reality is that our kids are just as likely to take interest in things that aren't our interests yet. And to show interest in things that they think are valuable is a way of saying that what matters to you matters to me, is a way of saying, well, you matter to me. This matters to me because you matter to me. And so it may feel like, oh my gosh, those stupid video games. There's a story in the book. Bill and I were given a talk some years ago at a local school, and there's a dad there, and we were talking about technology. And this dad raised his hand and was he was fuming. And so all my kid does is he locks himself in the room and plays and plays video games all the time. And not knowing the guy, I said, so what game does he play? He says, I don't know, something stupid. And you could hear the anger, but you could also hear the pain, because he has this 5-year-old kid who he just loves more than, as much as any of us would love a little person. And he thought, my kid loves video games more than he loves me. And he was trying to figure out what could he do to change his kid so his kid won't want to spend time with him rather than the video game. And, as gently as we could, we thought, I think the only effective approach is really for you as the grown-up or alleged grown-up to change your energy and take some interest in this game, because even, particularly little guys, it's particularly for boys, it's really this parallel play rather than, playing, make believe and whatever, that this parallel play. And I said, that's a way to spend time with your kid. And I think that'll start and open the door a little bit.
Yeah.
The last thing, Anna, is to try to catch your kids, try to have periods where you connect with your kids at night when they're a little tired, their guardian's down. I pick up my granddaughters from gym, from gymnastics at 8:30, and by the time we're home, it's dark, and the 8-year-old who, during the day, she's doing a million different things and doesn't connect with me as well. But she just talks and talk. We just talk and talk the whole way home, half an hour home. And I thought the same thing with my kids. I go up and sit in their bed at their bedtime, and they're a little tired. It's just much easier to really engage them and they'll open up more. Or at least a lot of kids will.
I agree. My daughter does the same thing. So that's why I, make sure her bedtime routine, she starts early so we can allocate time for this. It's important time. Yeah. And if sometimes when we're in a rush, you would say, just listen. I need some listening. She knows already that we've established this routine of sharing and listening.
Good.
And you're right. We don't have to be so smart to ask insightful questions. All it takes is to be present, listen without judgment. And they share. Oftentimes I find that that's all she needs, just an ear and a presence. And they don't need us to fix their problems for sure. Moving into the second chapter, because I want to go into at least 4 of the chapters and talk to you about some of the good stuff in the book. And I loved how you kept the book consistent with the previous book, the same language, the same topics and the themes, such as the non-anxious presence, the parent as a consultant. So I love that. And so let's talk about parent as a consultant.
It would have been a mistake if we'd been like, well, all this stuff in the first, but that didn't work at all. Let's try this.
Yeah. The feedback we got is horrible. It's not, it doesn't work anyway. Okay.
Yeah, parent as a consultant.
Yeah.
What's important in this chapter, and how can a parent use the language of the consultant?
I'll mention that I gave a lecture about the self-driven child in Houston just shortly before the onset of the pandemic. And I happened to mention one of the most elite schools in Washington, D.C. I don't remember why, but I did. And after the lecture, a woman came up to me and said, I'm a therapist at the Menninger Clinic here in Houston, which is a really prestigious mental health clinic in Texas. And she said, we know this elite school in Washington, D.C. very well because so many of the kids get into the most elite colleges but they can't handle them emotionally. So they come here, they take a medical leave and they come here for treatment. It's just that they just don't have experience running their own life. Whether they focus on school and building a resume for college and sports, but they don't really run their own life. And our goal is for kids to be able to run their own life before they go off to college. That's for go off to do whatever they're going to do. That they know they can run their own life. And I think that what we want to do pretty early on is to start and think of ourselves more as a consultant to our kids, who's trying to help the kids reach their own goals and develop themselves. Then as their manager or their boss or somebody who's continually on top of them or always knows best, so that kids can practice making their own decisions and kind of running their own life. And the three implications of this idea of parent as consultant: number one, that we offer help and advice. We don't try to force it down kids' throat. And number two, that we want kids to solve their own problems as much as possible, because that's what builds resilience and build that kind of emotional, that what we call in the book stress tolerance, an ability to function well in stressful situations, and also to make their own decisions. Mm-hmm. Do you want to jump in, Ben?
Yeah, no, and your point about these kids from this high, super competitive school, it applies everywhere, right? Because some of the feedback we got is, yeah, but what about a kid who has ADHD or a kid who has this challenge or that challenge? And this need for kids to have experience making decisions for themselves and paying attention to what matters to them, and having to weigh the pros and cons, and then having to solve these problems when they make mistakes, because of course they're going to make mistakes. They're adults in training, and we as adults, we make mistakes. It's incredibly important, because from a neurological level, it's the experience of feeling a sense of control, not being in control of everything, but having some say-so, some agency over your own life, that wires the prefrontal cortex, the decision-making and putting things in perspective part of the brain, to regulate the amygdala, the stress detecting part of the brain. And this is arguably the single best marker of mental health, is how strong are the connection between the two of those. So I have a student he's graduated high school a few years back. He went to what's called the Lab School in Washington, D.C., and it's a school for kids with really pretty moderate to severe language-based learning disabilities. And he had ADHD and he had anxiety. This is a complicated brain. So we're doing all this test prep stuff. And, so I would always end up talking a little bit about kind of what went on beyond these silly tests and try to understand how his mind worked. And so he was talking about anxiety, and I said, what are some of the things that make you anxious? Thinking, how do we attend to these when they come to doing well in tests? And what he really started talking about is, I'm worried about, what do I do when I get out of college? How do I find an apartment? How do I find a job? How do I? And of course, the typical 17-year-old isn't ready to do all those things, but he might be able to do pieces of that, right? And so what occurred to me about this boy, as I think is true of so many young people, is that we as parents do these things for our kids because we want them to go well. And we know or believe that we can do them better. But goodness, let kids make those decisions. Let them make mistakes when there's someone around them to give a helping hand when they need a helping hand, because this is this experience of feeling competent that really is, and fixing things is really going to wire the brain to be tolerant of stress and to feel more confident going out into the world once they're no longer under the same roof as we are.
But it's anxiety provoking for the parent, right? That's why your next chapter is all about the non-anxious present.
Well, and we didn't really understand fully, Anna, why, if you play this consulting role, why it can be stressful, until we realize, if what we're saying is that at times you have to sit on your hands and zip your lip, that this is his life, this is his decision, that there's nothing more stressful than a low sense of control. And if you feel, okay, I'm not going to say that, like what I always say, I'm not going to get on him about it, I'm not going to take responsibility for it, we can experience a low sense of control ourselves. And so we want to.
May I share my favorite current experience with this?
Yes.
So my daughter is 17, and she has just, things delayed. She's just now learning to drive. So for anyone who's a parent, if you've yet to have the experience of teaching your kid to drive, is it a sublime experience? Because you shift about, 3 feet to the right, but it is a fantastic change in perspective with only a 3-foot shift, right? And so because your sense of control is really, really low, right? And you're worried, oh my gosh, what does this kid know about driving? She's driven for, 1.4 hours or something. Fortunately, my wife, who is a wonderful driver, very sensible, very clear instructions, and awfully good at this, she'd help taught my son, taught my daughter as well. So we got in the car last night. We were driving down to the grocery store, and we got in the car. I think you'd approve of this, Bill. And I asked her, I said, what advice would be helpful for me to give to you? What would you like me to say? What feedback, if any? And what would you like me not to say? And she looked at me and she said, well, if it seems like I'm about to kill us, or that we're about to get hit by a car, I'm about to run into something, that would be great to know. But otherwise, I think I know what I'm doing. So probably less is more.
Wow.
It was hilarious.
That's fantastic.
I'm still alive, right? Amazing.
I love it. I love it, my friend. And I'll just mention that two of the ways we talk about the language of a parent consultant. And two angles on this are, number one, that we talk about that a consultant doesn't force. And when it feels like we're trying to force our kids, and we're trying to use the force of our will to get our kids to do things, we want to, unless it's a complete emergency, we want to remind ourselves that this never works. And what we want to do, because we don't want to have power over our kids, we want to influence our kids in a positive way. And so we say things like the chapter from the Self-Driven Child, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. We say things like, I'm not trying to force you to do this. Obviously, I couldn't make you do this. All you'd have to do is flop on the floor or start screaming or pissing your pants. I mean, I couldn't make you do this. And just saying that, it sounds scary at first to say that. It's very disarming, obviously. But it's also very empowering. It's like a judo move. Whenever I'm asked to talk kids into, a lot of parents say, could you talk to them about this? And what they mean is, can you talk them into this? And I always start by saying, I don't want anybody to try to force you to do this. You're smart enough to figure out your own life. And I'd like to talk to you about it, though, because I got some ideas. Can I run them by you? And so it's this idea of minimizing force. And if it feels like we're using we're telling kids something and they're telling them louder, or yelling at them, then we want to apologize. Say, I realize that I can't force you to do things. And it's kind of disrespectful if I do that. And also that we Ned and I both are pretty good at getting buy-in from kids. That we see so many parents who just kind of say, I've told them 1 million times. Well, don't tell them 1 million times. Try to get some. Try to see if he wants to hear what you're going to tell him. So we say stuff like, I've got an idea. Can I run it by you? Or I wonder what would happen if you did it this way. Or can I give you some advice? I mean, if you don't want to hear it, that's okay. But I got an idea. So we want to be kind of tentative, or for whatever it's worth, and then we make an observation in a way that it doesn't feel like we're forcing.
And Ned, what were you feeling during that time when your daughter said that, like internally?
Well, it's a great question, right? It actually was, it was super helpful. It was super helpful because for her to say, to articulate that clearly helped me know that she's got this, right? She's paying attention to, she's thought this through. It's super, super helpful because so often, we as parents start giving advice, and gosh knows I do this because I'm just so fond of my own words. And I'll start giving her advice of things that are already in her own head. And I don't know, so I don't know why in this particular moment I had the good sense to say, how can I help you, rather than jumping in, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. Because certainly we as parents do it all the time with homework and cleaning up and all this kind of jazz. And I had experience with a teenager years ago who made the point that the more my parents remind me to do my homework, the less I want to do it. And I think that observation sort of generalizes that when kids feel that when we don't get buy-in, as Bill points out, and we force advice on them, particularly things that may already be in their own head, many people, and probably adults as well, will kind of reflexively reject what is in their own best interest. And so in this situation, I was another set of eyes. I was there to help her. I certainly had my seatbelt on because mistakes can be made. But it was really wonderful because my I mean, she's 17. I mean, she's not fully ready to run the whole world, but in terms of having an adult brain, she's pretty much there. I mean, and she has less experience than I do, but she's every bit, and IQ wise, I'm sure she's brighter than I am. So it was really helpful. And I think if she felt very, very respected, her response was so clear and so thoughtful. It made me feel less stressed because in many ways, as parents, I'm happy to let go and control so long as I know that she's got, two hands on the steering wheel and is ready to chart things in ways that are safe and get us there and back safely.
Yes, my daughter started volleyball camp this week, and she has to bring lunch with her. So I overpacked lunch with healthy lunch, unhealthy options and everything, like overpacked. Mm-hmm. And then she came home and she didn't obviously eat all of it. And the next day she didn't take the lunchbox at all. She just grabbed whatever she could and shoved it in her book bag. And I said, but how about the lunchbox, honey? How about this? I made this. How about that? And she said, Mom, I know how much is enough for me. And I have money, there is snacks there I can buy. And I just sat there. It was very hard. What I wanted to say is, I spent time and money and energy and prepared this lunch for you and you're ignoring me. This is what I was actually feeling that. But then I said, so what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, let's say she stays hungry or she doesn't get full completely. She has money. There is a vending machine. There is other kids. And I started comforting myself, but it's hard at times to see them drive their life and you're not so much part of it. I can see that increased autonomy and independence. My daughter is 13, and these are good lessons for us to learn in letting go of control, letting go of our own agendas, and be present and have faith that, they will become, as I remember from our conversation with Dr. Stixrud in October, that I always remind myself this phrase. I don't know if you mentioned it or I took it away. I say, one day she's going to be a healthy, functioning adult in this world. Like, I don't need to, I always say this phrase, functioning adult. And I believe in that she will.
Well, it's such a great point, Anna. And the other thing that I'd say is that we purposely use the phrase stress tolerance, partly because I think there've been 14,000 books about resilience and sort of what that means, maybe sort of the life beaten out of it. But really, when we talk about getting through life, a healthy stress response will flare when something is intense, but then we want it to come back to baseline, right? This is a wiring of the brain, much like a muscle. You only develop that by getting through stressful things. And I'm sure the three of us could sit here and list all the really hard things we went through in childhood or adulthood or whatever, which gives us the confidence that we can get through hard things. And so, yeah, it could be pretty lousy if your daughter had 4 hours of volleyball practice on an empty stomach, and boy, that doesn't feel good. But if that were to happen, can we really say it's the worst possible thing? Because if she could reflect on that experience, like my son who's here is 19, we're all up here, upstate New York, and hiking, and he still to this day talks about a hike that when he was 11, and it was like 2 days in pouring rain. It was just a miserable affair. Every time he tells it, it gets longer and longer. It was 2 weeks and they're bears. I'm teasing a little bit. But, in many ways, part of being kind of these epic narratives, right? They're probably a little self-aggrandizing, but when we tell about the terrible things we got through, that's a way of signaling to ourselves of the things that we can get through. Because goodness, for everyone who's listening to this, Anna, if we could say to everyone that nothing profoundly terrible would ever happen to your kid, that'd be awesome. But we can't know that, and we can't say that, right? I'll give you the kind of the paradigm example. Bill and I were talking about this the other day. My son, 3 weeks ago, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Now, fortunately, according to the experts, if you're going to have a brain tumor, he's apparently got the right one. He's always well-mannered that way. We don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but all the indications are that it's going to go, it's going to go well enough, right? And so we don't know, that terrible, terrible 12 hours of pouring rain. Did that help prepare him in the sense of, I think I'm going to get through this too, right?
Yeah. Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, this is like, we worry as parents, right? I mean, they're our kids. We want to protect them, provide, give them safety and everything that we can, or everything we didn't get. But things like that happen, right? That are completely outside of our control. And then what do you do? And you're not suggesting here to be hands-off parents. I just want to, put that out there, that it's not about being this, okay, go live your life, kid, and you're this hands-off parent. You still have worries, but you don't want to project those worries onto your kids' life.
I think that's right. And yeah, you're exactly, right. I know Bill's going to jump in a second, but it's exactly right that we are wired to want to protect our kids. But we really want to be thinking about not having our goal be, how do we make them feel safe, make them feel safe, but rather how to make them feel courageous, right? And courageous, courage does not exist in the absence of fear. It means you're in a situation where this is hard, this is intense, it's going to be unpleasant. You may lose your hair, blah, 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 blah. But I have confidence that we're going to get through it. Doesn't mean it's easy, doesn't mean it's fun, but I have confidence that, you're going to get through this and we're going to be there with you and help in all the ways we can. But it's simply not true that I can, or you can, or any of us can protect our kids from anything challenging or everything bad happening to them. And the best way to get through life is to have confidence that when things are really hard, that you're going to figure out a way and we're going to get through it.
A headline from the Onion years ago was, "Loved ones recall local man's cowardly battle with cancer." And I think that what we want is we want empathy. This sucks. This is really hard. At the same time, we want to that if anybody can handle this, you can handle this. That we talk in the book in one of the chapters about change, about the new space program for it's an acronym, but it's for parents for helping kids with anxiety. And one of the things that we try to do is because I know this stuff is really scary for you, and I'm 100% confident that you can handle it. That combination of empathy and communicating courage, so as opposed to fear, that's what we want to do, ideally.
Yeah, true. Then let's talk about the non-anxious presence. The things that the parent does to lower their own anxiety can make their kids more anxious.
Yeah.
It's like we do certain things to lower our own anxiety, but as a result, we increase the anxiety in our children.
Yeah, this is wonderful research. A woman named Jessie Borelli out of University of California, Irvine, who studies parental over control. And she set up this really clever little experiment where they had kids who were trying to solve it in the lab, trying to solve a digital puzzle on a computer. And they had the parents, I think in this case, they're all moms, who were there kind of for moral support. And the only instruction to moms were, don't give instructions to your kid. You can say, I think you're going to get it, sweetheart, or whatever, but don't, move it this way, move it that way. And the puzzle looked easy, but actually was not, right? And so eventually the kids got frustrated and then they kind of got distressed. And as they got distressed, their moms got distressed because, like you said before, we're wired as parents to want to help our kids and, and keep them safe and make them not, keep from being too upset. And once the kids started to get stressed, and the moms did in return, they all jumped in. No, but move it over to the left. What if you turned it that way? But move it, And as they did this, they both had heart rate monitors. When the moms finally jumped in and gave advice, their heart rate went down because they no longer felt helpless. They now felt a sense of control, and their kids' stress went up. And so it's really hard. We're wired to want to jump in and help, right? But just because it makes us feel better doesn't mean that we should, particularly if it's at the expense of our kids. And this is why we talk about this chapter. It's not easy to be a non-anxious presence, but as we talk about in the book, as Bill points out, so much of the work for our kids is really work on ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. And when we've been traveling around before COVID, we were traveling all around the country. We were just so struck by every place we went we went to Seattle and talked at a school in Seattle. And they said they have several second grade kids. They're so stressed, they're refusing to go to school. We were in Texas, and in a kind of an elite independent school. And the counselor said the fifth grade boys here are having panic attacks because of the pressure in middle school. You go to all the high schools, all the counselors talk about is just how incredibly stressed and anxious kids are. And the message they must be getting is be very afraid. This world is very dangerous. And I think that we know that most of us are living in the safest time and place in human history. And ideally, we give kids the message that things like, this is a pretty safe place, this world, that most people's lives turn out pretty good. You know, that you can screw up a lot of stuff and still do really well in this world. And it's not that we're supposed to never be anxious and never be worried. It's just that we know that all organizations, including families, they work best if the people in charge are not highly anxious and emotionally reactive. We know simply that if you're calm, it's much easier to soothe an infant. It's much easier to help your 5-year-old who's melting down, and it's much easier to help a 10th grader who comes home. His girlfriend just dumped him and he's really upset. If we can stay calm, it's much easier to help. It's just, you can't imagine a situation where we can be most helpful if we get really pissed or we're really anxious, or we're more anxious than the kids are. And Ned, so often kids say, don't tell my parents.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the reason we put that in there is it's important. It's helpful for parents to know, to be reminded rather, that our kids have spent a lifetime watching our faces, right? And so they get signaled by us, right? And so if we're anxious, they're going to be anxious because that's the safest thing to do, to assume that there's something going on here, and it's better to be alarmed than not, right? You know, and you can if you have an infant, you can scrunch up your face and make an angry face, and they'll simply start to cry as a result of it. But we also know that teenagers and kids especially are while they're very good at picking up on feelings, they're not always that great at analyzing what those feelings are, right? So they'll often think that everything is anger when it's a host of it's frustration, it's exasperation, it's whatever it happens to be. We talked in the first book about how my daughter, who's kind of more sensitive than other kids, would pick up on secondhand stress. And so this is why, as much as we can, we want to move in the direction of being a non-anxious parent, because a non-anxious present, because we will think better. We will be more purposeful with our language, but will also literally help our kids think more clearly. There's a story in the book. I have a twin brother, identical twin. He's a paramedic, and partly by his training, but probably also by how he approaches this, he's just as cool and collected under pressure as you can imagine. And he was telling me he'll often be at a situation where something's going not well, and the family members who are there are understandably just really, really upset and kind of freaking out, in part because it's a new situation for them. And when he has the opportunity, he'll tend to do things like turn to them and say, "So I can see that you're really upset. I just want you to know that I'm not worried about this. I feel like we've got this under control. So I don't think you need to worry either. If it helps you, I can let you know when you should start to worry or panic." And he said it just completely changes the energy, because, much like me with driving, if my daughter says I've got this under control and I believe her, awesome. My brother with signals to people, we've got this. And that's what we'd like to do in this situation. It's as much as we can. I'm sorry that you got cut from the soccer team. Maybe people didn't invite you, to the party. But if I don't go to pieces, gosh, that sounds pretty hard. I wonder what our options are here. Right? It tells us it's not a crisis. It's not where we want to be, but there's a path out of this situation.
Yeah, not catastrophizing things or projecting our own anxieties. And like you mentioned in the book, there are all those apps now that parents monitor their children's whereabouts 24/7, right? I have a neighbor who lives in an apartment, and it's a one floor, right? There is no other levels. And her child is taking a nap, and she is conversing with me, and she's having a cup of coffee. But she constantly looks at her phone because that's the baby monitor where she is looking at her sleeping baby. But she can just go to the next room or hear even when the baby wakes up. It drives me anxious when I see that, in our interaction. But it's like, yes, these devices, these tools, these apps are available, but are they really helpful? Are they eroding trust? Are they increasing anxiety? Like, what's the use of this?
Bill, can you explain the concept of accommodating and kind of what that what we're doing when we do those things?
Sure. So in the study of anxiety, people talk about accommodating. And the idea is related to what we were talking about before, which is because we're mammals, we're wired to try to protect our young and to soothe them when they're upset. We're just wired that way. But one of the things, as kids get older, if they're highly anxious, one of the things we tend to accommodate their anxiety, and most commonly by reassuring them. But the kids that'll ask 100 times a day, about lightning, or well, no, it's not. It's the winter. It's not going to be any lightning. That kind of thing, where we reassure them, or that if they're anxious about having people over, we want to have people over dinner. We make accommodations to protect our kids from anxiety, and we know that these accommodations that they work in the moment, but they actually make kids more anxious rather than less. The way you kind of not get so anxious is, as Ned was saying earlier, you have that experience that I can handle stuff.
Yeah.
So the same thing, what parents were then doing that with ourselves is in the moment, the baby's still breathing. The baby's still breathing, right? And we do it over and over. But if we do that over time, it increases our anxiety. It doesn't decrease it, right? Because the only way that we learn to tolerate that stress is to tolerate it and allow our nervous system to come back to the other side and deal with it. There was, for me, a really fun experience when my son went to college. My wife and I, we dropped him off, and we got the 5 minutes before you dump all the stuff on the curb, and then off he goes because we weren't allowed in the dorm. And the three of us sat there hugging him. I'm blessed with the greatest kids in the world. And Matthew is one of the most lovable people on the planet. And my heart's just like, oh, right. And so he goes off, and my wife and I drive home in tears, and just because we just missed the kid enormously. And that night, all I wanted to do was to text him or call and say, how are you doing? Are you okay? How are you doing? Are you okay? And I sat there, and I sat with that thought for a long while. And then I tried to remind myself, he's talking with his roommate. He's making friends with the neat kids, the pretty girl he's got a crush on, whatever, down the hall. This is his moment. And if I do this, I'm interrupting it. And also, am I calling him to make sure that he feels better? Am I doing that to help him, or am I doing that to make myself feel better? And I came down, hands down, I was doing this to make me feel better, just to know that everything was okay. And so I turned off the phone, I let it go. And and a day later, 2 days later, he texted me and said, "This is great. I love the kids on my floor, blah, blah, blah." And so I think if we're honest, we really could reflect on how many of the things that we do that we think are to make our kids be safe or feel safe are really to make ourselves feel better. And we want to move in the direction of doing less of that, because it'll just make us be more hyper vigilant. And we're signaling to, as Bill pointed out before, we're signaling to our kids that the world is very, very scary, that I have to watch you all the time. And that those are just not helpful messages to send to kids.
Yeah, that's such a great example. I love that. And just to pause and ask that question, who is this serving? And is this serving me, or am I truly concerned about his safety? And even if there was something, he would contact you, right? I'm sure you are his emergency contact, or he may take care of his own situation.
You're so right.
Right. But oftentimes our own anxieties, our own sense of worth, it's like it gets in the way. But to pause, have the courage to pause like you did, and be honest with yourself and be with your own feelings in the moment. I think it will go along the way if we could all do that as frequently as possible.
There's a wonderful line at the end of The Self-Driven Child that we picked up from a movie called Miss Peregrine's School for Gifted or Peculiar Children, I think it is. And the one protagonist, they all have these superpowers, and he thought he turns to the other and says, I'm so sorry, I didn't keep you safe. And the other one turns to him and she said, you gave us something so much more powerful. You made us feel courageous, right? And so we want to be so careful as parents that we can think of particularly when you got little guys, you feel like a superhero, right? You can go in there and you can save them from anything. You can dry their tears and comfort them. And it feels great, right? You feel omnipotent. I made this little person feel so much better. But if we do that over and over and over, we're depriving the kid of the opportunity to be the kind of epic hero of his own epic narrative, right? That rather than being the superhero, she's forever the damsel in distress waiting to be saved. And you don't want to be the damsel in distress. You want to be Superwoman, not the damsel, right?
Yeah, that word failure is key word. I think a lot of parents are afraid to quote unquote fail their children. But then one may pose and ask, a parent may say, then what is it all about? Like, what's my role in this whole parenting process, right? What is it all about? You have adult children.
Yeah, well, for me, it's about, we're natural. We say in the first chapter of the book, we're natural authorities. We're bigger. We have more experience. We thought about stuff. We learn a lot of stuff. We know more, and so we want to use who we are and what we know to help our kids learn what they need to learn about life, so that they can find a place in life that they're happy with. And in the book, we have a chapter on expectations where we talk about success. And for us, a successful life is a life that you're happy with. And we see so many kids who have so many adults who've achieved everything, but they're miserable. And for us, the really successful people are people who create lives that they're happy with. And that's why I think what our role is. It's really as guides. It's really as guides or kind of the captain of the ship, but not barking orders. Be respectfully helping kids decide who they want to be. One of the most useful things anybody ever said to me about child rearing was I don't remember who it was, but years ago, when my kids were teenagers, somebody said to me, the greatest thing about raising teenagers is that every day when they come home from school, you get to see who they're deciding to be. That's what I love, that this is their life. And I organize my thinking around my role as a parent by asking 3 questions. Whose life is it? Whose responsibility is it? Whose problem is it? And I think as much as we can, we want to remember it's the kid's life. It's his responsibility. It's her problem. And we do that not in a loving, not in a you're on your own buddy kind of way, but it's in a loving, respectful way. I'm here to help. I'm here to offer advice. I'm here to help you in any way I can. I love you more than anything on the planet. But I don't want to weaken you by taking responsibility for stuff that's yours, or acting like I always know what's right for you. I don't know what's right for you. I don't know who you want to be. That's my sense. Is we want to be people who think of ourselves as guides who can help guide our kids to learn how to function in this world in a way that they're going to have a life they're happy with.
Yeah, I love that. I was giving a talk at a school. This is at least 10 years ago. And I ended the talk by saying that for all of us who are sitting there as parents and their kids were teens and mine were tots, I said that I think of my job is to help my kids grow and develop, but in many ways to let them be more in charge, me less in charge. I said, look, because I could drive home from this talk tonight and get run over by a cement mixer, and that could be the end of Matt and Katie's dad. And I said, I would imagine, or I'd hope they'd be a little upset and miss me. But at some point, I'd want them to get up and dust themselves off and get on with life, because if they can't live without me, I've really failed as a parent. Right? That we love feeling needed, but it seems to me that our job is increasingly to pivot away from being someone that they need to being someone whom they want. Right? There's a story in the book. My wife and I were out with for a walk with our son. It was his sophomore year, and he had a talk. He had a school dance that night, and there was a party after the dance. And it was the first time he was getting invited to kind of a real party, right? And my son, like his dad, it's a little nerdy, and so he said, "Dad, I got a question for you." And Mom, Dad, I got a question for you. I said, "Well, what's your question?" He said, "So what do I do if I'm at that party tonight?" And I said, "Well, you need a ride?" And he's like, "No, I got to Uber. I'm fine." I said, "Okay, fine." So what do I do if I'm there and people are drinking alcohol? Now inside, I'm like, "Yes, the parenting win. I've nailed this thing." Like, woohoo, right? And but I played it much cooler than that, I promise. And so, well, tell me more. And so we ended up having this beautiful conversation about the pros and cons and what he would do. And it ended with his saying that this sort of cautionary tale he had heard from a friend of a bunch of kids were some other party, a bunch of kids were drinking. Some kid got really, really sick. And this kind of the cops were called and everyone fled like, cockroaches from the light. And this one girl had stayed to help this other kid who was desperately like way too much alcohol. And she got a $500 fine for being in a party where alcohol was served. And he's like, so the lesson that he heard from his friends is don't be there when things like that happen. I said, well, it's a really good point. And I'm, sorry for her. She'd get punished for, no good deed goes unpunished. I said, there's another way to look at this. I said, what's that? And I said, there's a chance that she had the opportunity to pay $500 to save the life of someone else's kid. Who can say? And we did have conversations about alcohol, and because we take that stuff pretty seriously too. But I'm really convinced that, because my wife and I have really taken this position of just the way Bill said, of whose life is it, and trying to give advice and not take on what they can take on for themselves, even if they do it in a messy way, has put us in this position where, my relationship, all of ours, we will have relationship with our children as adults way longer than we have a relationship with our children as children. And so we're trying to plan for that, because I want my kid when he's 26 or 32 or whatever to say, Dad, I got another question for you. And what's that, pal? So I'm thinking about proposing, right? Don't you want to be part of that conversation?
It's such a great point. I never even thought about that way, that we have way more time with our kids when they're going to be adults than when they're kids, right? It's so true. It's like reorients me. It's such a great point. I love that. This was such great conversation. I really appreciated your presence, your time, your wisdom, and this book is amazing. I highly recommend everyone getting a copy right now. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us. We love your work.
Yeah, you're a really good interviewer too. You listen so carefully. It's great. You ask great questions. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. I sure did. What's your biggest takeaway? Did you find it useful? Be sure to get their new book. What do you say? How to talk to kids to build motivation, stress tolerance, and a happy home. And if you are a parent to a younger child, I recommend my booklet called 15 Keys to Effective Communication, Building Strong Parent-Child Relationships, available on Amazon. Get in touch. I would love to hear from you. Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. Call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for you, my international listener, I have a free tool on the contact page of my website, authenticparenting.com/contact. Connect with me on Instagram and see what I share from my personal life. And if you are feeling generous, please take a moment or two to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. It's very helpful. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.